So we're starting Genesis. Genesis is the Greek name from the Hebrew name Bereshith.
It's time to change your world. It's time to let it go. The things you used to think, the things you used to know, they don't help you anymore. It's time to change your mind. If it's peace you want to find.
This is Kurt Kaikkonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Change Your World, we'll be in the book of Genesis. So grab your Bible. We'll be starting in chapter 38.
It's time to change your world. You need to let it go.
And so here, this seems like a very odd place in the narrative of the story of Joseph to be telling the story of Judah and Tamar. And this story, it does chronologically fall into the middle of Joseph's timeline of the time that he spent as a slave in Egypt. So now we have Judah here, and he's living away from his family, and he's dwelling among the Canaanites. And that's because he's comfortable with the Canaanites. Because if you read here, you see all his friends were Canaanites. And especially Hira, the Adullamite, who seems to be his best friend, because he's mentioned twice by name in this chapter and also referred to once. And he's called there his good friend. And Adullam, if you look at the map of Israel, Adullam is very close to Chizib, where Judah lives. But Judah, he's not supposed to be living with the Canaanites because he's been called with those 11 other brothers who are to be tribes of Israel. And they're supposed to be a separated people because they're supposed to be a people chosen by God. But Judah, he's beginning to assimilate himself with the Canaanite people. It's because he likes them. And so he lives like them. And he's often visiting his good buddy Hira, the Canaanite. Because what they do is they do the things that Canaanites like to do, which seems what Judah liked to do, and that's to go down and go down with his buddy Hira to go meet girls. And so Judah does. So he meets a girl, and she's the daughter of Shua, and she's a beautiful Canaanite woman, and so he marries her. But up until now, Abraham's covenant people, they've been keeping themselves away and separated from the Canaanite women. And you remember, Abraham and Isaac, they both protected their sons from marrying the local Canaanite girls because they know that they would change their hearts. They would turn their hearts from God. Because the Canaanites, their practices are not only sexually immoral, but they also worship many false gods. And their lifestyle is offensive to the real God. And it's offensive because their own practices, they actually hurt their own society. And most of us would agree to that because we would all agree that child abuse and prostitution and human sacrifices, they're just not acceptable behavior. And they have other practices that we can't even mention in a church because these people, they live the most vile pagan lives of all the peoples. That's why God was kicking them out of the land. And so Judah and his Canaanite wife, the daughter of Shua, they had 3 sons, and the first one being Er. And you might well think, well, Judah really did make an error, but Er's name means watchful. And then he had 2 more sons, Onan and Shelah, and they all grew up living like Canaanites. And why shouldn't they? They lived in Cana. They lived in a nice Canaanite neighborhood. Their mom's a Canaanite, and their dad lives like one. So for us here, it's just really important to see, you have to be very careful who you marry. If you're a Christian, you really need to marry a Christian. And you also really need to consider where you're going to live and who you surround yourself with and who you allow your family to surround themselves with. Because it's not just for your sake. Because you might do all right in any kind of environment that you go into because you are a Christian and you have a relationship with God. but your children, your kids, they might not survive it. And so one day, Judah took a wife for his oldest son, Er. Now, Judah, when he picked his own wife, he just picked someone that pleased his own eyes. He picked somebody that would fulfill all his desires, and they would have had the same values that he had, the same lifestyle that he liked to live. And so they were probably like party people. They were like partiers. And that's what we find when someone picks a wife for themselves, that they usually pick somebody like themselves, that shares their own real values, the values that are actually in their heart. So this often makes us wonder, when a Christian marries a non-Christian, well, what kind of Christian they really are. You know what they profess, but when their lifestyle doesn't match up with their words, it's usually the words that are wrong. But when you go and you pick a wife for your son, you're not going to go out there and pick for him a seductress. You're not going to go find an immoral woman with a questionable past. When you pick a wife for your son, you're going to probably find an attractive woman and a woman of a good moral character. You'd pick somebody smart, someone who will be loyal, from a good family, from a reputable family. You probably pick from somebody you know, because that's what we all want for our children. We want them to have a good spouse, and we want them to have great children. So when you're picking your own wife, you might, pick someone with some shortcomings for yourself because of your own desires and your own lusts. But you would never probably ever shortchange your son. And many commentators that you read, they'll tell you that Tamar is a Canaanite. But the Bible gives no ethnicity for Tamar. We don't know what she was. But the word Tamar in Hebrew is the word for date. And it's not like going out on a date, but it's the kind of date you eat. It's the fruit from the date palm tree. And her name, Tamar, can also be translated as palm tree. And if Judah here, if he has children of the marrying age, that means his brothers probably also have daughters that could be of the marrying age. And even then, you have other tribes living in the land of that area of the Canaanites. You have the Ishmaelites, you have the Midianites, you have the Edomites, and they're all descended from Abraham, and none of them are Canaanites. But I would suggest, whatever Tamar was ethnically, she was a good woman, and she was smart, and she was pretty. She was everything you would ever want for your son. And then the Lord, he just calls it straight up, and he says, Er was wicked. And it says he killed him. So Er had no heir. He had no children. Because the Lord is not going to bring his Messiah through a wicked Canaanite man, even if his father is Judah and a son of Israel. And because Er had no child, Judah, he asked his other son, Onan, his second son, to marry Tamar, to raise up an heir for his oldest son, Er. And this is called a levirate marriage. And it comes from the Latin word levir, which means brother-in-law. And we'll see these rules come out later in the Mosaic Law, but we can see that even here, they practice these rites even before the law of Moses. And so Onan, he takes his brother's widowed wife, and he makes her his wife. And then we're told what kind of man Onan is, because he's the kind of man that doesn't want to raise up an heir to his brother. And so what Onan does is he never completes the act of intimacy with Tamar that would lead to a child. And many people, they've taught and used this passage to condemn the use of birth control or some types of sexual practices called onanism. But I'm not a judge of those kind of things, because the Bible, it doesn't tell us about those types of things. And so I won't tell you. You're going to have to figure that out for yourself, because I don't know. But I do think I know why God killed Onan, because God knew that Onan had an evil character because Onan here, he should have taken care of Tamar because she became his wife and he became her husband. And according to the rules of a Levirate marriage, Onan did not have to take her as a wife. He had a choice, but it was considered very honorable to raise up a child to your brother and to keep his name in the family. And you have to figure that Tamar, that she was a pretty woman and she was a kind woman. And Onan saw that, but all Onan wanted to do is to use Tamar to gratify his own lusts. He didn't love Tamar, and he had no intention of ever giving Tamar a child because he didn't care about raising up an heir to his brother's name. And you'd think, well, why? Why wouldn't Onan want to do that? Because everybody would really know that the child was his. They would know that Onan was the child's father. And through that, well, Tamar, she would be comforted and she would also be provided for because without a husband, there is no provision for Tamar. She's still considered heir's wife. But the reason Onan didn't do this is because Onan was greedy. He didn't care about Tamar's dilemma because he knew that child would not be considered his own child, but it would be heir's son. And you have to remember, heir, he's the firstborn. And so if he had this child with Tamar, this child would receive the double portion of the father's inheritance of Judah's wealth when he died. Because with Judah having 3 sons, his inheritance would have been divided into 4 portions. And the firstborn, heir, he would have received 2 of those portions. But if he didn't have a son, Onan would receive the right of the firstborn, and that double portion would be his. So Onan would eventually end up with 2/3 of Judah's wealth instead of only 25%. And God, he didn't like Onan treating Tamar like that. So God killed Onan. And so now we have Tamar here, and she's been a widow twice. And Tamar, you see, she's legally under her father-in-law, Judah's headship, because Tamar's marriage was an arranged marriage. So she's not free to marry anybody she wants. But Judah, he is also obligated to provide her a husband. But Judah, he's treating Tamar as if there's something wrong with her, as if she's some kind of cursed woman, like some kind of black widow spider that's killing off her mates. But really, up until now, she's only been used to expose the evil that already exists in Judah's half-Canaanite sons. So Judah, he holds back his youngest son, Shelah, because Judah's afraid that he's going to die too. And we don't know how old Shelah was at this time, but it would seem really strange if he was a 12-year-old boy and he had a 20-something-year-old wife. So Judah, he tells Tamar to go back to her parents' home and to wait for Shelah to grow up. So she does, and so she goes back home. And she's wearing the clothes of widowhood, and she's wearing them year after year after year. And at some point during that time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, dies. But then the years still keep passing, and Shelah's getting pretty old. He's old enough to be married, and he's probably older than the age of Er when she was first married to him. And Tamar, she realizes that Judah has no intentions of ever providing for her a husband. And so she's been condemned to this life of barrenness. And in this society, it's dishonorable for a woman to be childless. And she's too young to be a widow. And she's been wearing these clothes of widowhood most of her adult young womanhood. And you see, just as Judah, he's lived around Tamar all these years, and he knew her character and her integrity. Well, she has also lived around him all these years, And she knew Judah's character, and she knew his shortcomings and what type of lifestyle he liked to live. And she knew that Judah wasn't a very dedicated, godly man, and that all his friends were Canaanites, and he liked Canaanite women. And he liked everything, not only the women, but he liked everything of that lifestyle and everything that goes with that lifestyle. And Tamar, she knows what time of year this is. It's sheep shearing time, which is party time. And she's told that Judah's going down to Timnah to see his old pal Hira the Adullamite. And Judah, he could have went to go visit his family, but that's just not the kind of guy Judah is, because this is kind of, for Judah, this is kind of like spring break or like the yearly trip to Vegas. And he's going to go out down there and he's going to hang out with his party boy buddies, Hira and his pals. And this is probably how Judah, he found his first wife. But she's no longer around, and she died. And so he's no longer obligated to her. So Judah, he packs up his stuff and he goes on his yearly business trip with the boys. And he's probably really lonely because he's not dating anyone. And there's a lot of people, and they'll act pretty moral while they're around their homes. And we've seen these kind of character flaws where they have a different kind of lifestyle when they're away from home, and they think they can get away with it. That they think that their immoral behavior is private and nobody knows what they do when they're away, that it's hidden from the people they live with. But Tamar, she knew what he did when he went down to Timnah, and so did God. And if you know your Bible pretty well, you would know that Timnah is where Samson, where he found his first wife, who was a Philistine woman, and it says that she pleased him. So Timnah is not the place where you find these women of great moral character. So Tamar, she dresses up like a woman of low moral character, the kind of woman you might find in Timnah. And so she dressed up like a cult prostitute. And that means she would have had her face veiled because they're not to be known, because that's how those kind of harlots dressed. And this was apparently the type of women that Judah was hoping to meet. And so Tamar, she leaves her parents' home and she beats Judah down to the area outside of Timnah because she knew which way he would pass by. But Judah, he wasn't prepared for this encounter because he didn't bring any money with him. He wasn't probably expecting anything to happen to him until he got into Timnah. He wasn't really expecting to meet women on the way, but he's ready to start having this trip to Vegas, and he wants to make a deal with this young woman to have an affair that he can remember. But Tamar, she wasn't looking to act like a prostitute. She was only looking for one man, and that man was Judah, because all Tamar really wanted was to have a husband, and all she wanted to have was a family. She didn't want to be condemned to a destitute life of loneliness and wearing widow garments. She wanted to be a mom. She wanted to have a meaningful life. And so Judah approaches her, and they barter, but he has nothing to barter with. And they agreed on the price of a young goat. But she says she wants a pledge, and she's not really interested here in goats. But he has nothing with him, and she's not going to take credit because she's already devised this plan. She wants his ID. She wants that signet and that cord because that's his signature. That's what he makes all his deals with. That's his personal stamp that he stamps on everything, and it's exclusively his. It's like having his personal credit card. And then she takes his customized staff, and he's been walking around proud of that staff for the last 20 years. And so it happens. And Tamar, she conceives a child. And Judah, he's not really wanting to advertise what he's been doing because he's still pretending to take this moral high ground. And he doesn't have the courage to bring that goat himself. So he sends his pagan buddy Hira the Adullamite, his Canaanite party pal. And the girl that he met, he says, she's not there. And no one has ever heard of anyone ever working that corner. And so they decide to keep it quiet so that Judah, so he can maintain his good reputation. So now Tamar back home, and she's wearing her widow garments again, and she starts showing, and she can't hide her pregnancy any longer. And everybody assumes she's been playing the harlot. And it's obvious that this is not a love story. Because you see that Judah, he doesn't care for her, but he should, because Tamar is part of his household. She is part of his family. She's his daughter-in-law. But what Judah does is he condemns her to death. And not just condemning her to death, but death by burning her. Because to Judah, Tamar is just an obligation. She's someone to feed. She's someone he has no intentions of blessing. She was only a constant reminder to him of the death of his two sons. And it's really awkward when you condemn someone to death for something that you're guilty of, where you walk around with your friends and your family and your neighbors like you're some kind of moral pillar in the community, and where you thought you were keeping your sin life private, and that you conceal that area of your life where no one would ever find out. And you've convinced yourself that what happens in Timnah stays in Timnah, but not this time. And now he's going to be undone, and he's going to be undone in front of everybody, and it's going to be publicly, because you can't hide it, because she has your driver's license. She has your personalized credit card. She has that walking stick that you've been strutting around in front of everybody. And all she has to say is, oh, the father of my child, he's the guy that owns all these. So you're found guilty of what you've just accused Tamar of, playing the harlot. But you really were. And when you did it, you were also serving the little foreign gods that they had. And so now you got Tamar, and he admits it. He admits that she's more righteous than him. So Tamar, she's off the hook. She'll live. And Judah, he'll live too. He'll only be just a little embarrassed. And it's a shame that Judah doesn't want anything to do with her anymore, that Judah doesn't take her to be his wife. Because you have to remember, Tamar, she's already been a widow twice. And she's been under Judah's authority for a long time, because he's the one who's made all the arrangements that have affected her life since she left her family to be joined to his family. And so Judah, he rejects her. And I'm convinced that it was his loss, that she was a wonderful woman with a great reputation. And I believe that's why he picked her for his son. But that's also why God picked her for his son, because through her, his son, Jesus Christ, would come through her lines. And God doesn't only just give her one child, but he gives her twins. And that first one that's born, Perez, the one that came out without the red thread, well, he's in the lineage of Christ, and he's mentioned both in the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke, because he was also in the lineage of King David. And this Tamar, she is one of the only 4 women ever mentioned in the ancestry of Jesus Christ. And that's, I'm pretty sure, why the story is even here.
You need to change your world. You need to let it go.
Thanks for listening to Change Your World. Change Your World is an outreach of Calvary Chapel Waterford and your neighborhood church. If you're listening to Change Your World in the Detroit metro area, why don't you join us for church this Sunday? Our service time is 10 a.m. at Calvary Chapel Waterford, 183 South Winding Drive, Waterford, Michigan. We're competing with the Catholics. It's only an hour. All the donuts you can eat, and you don't have to believe a thing we say, but it could change your world.
You need to change your world.
The rest of today's message can be heard at yourneighborhoodchurch.org. So check us out and download the app. And until next week, remember,